I'm Kimberly C. Paul. As I travel throughout each state, I realize that death is just a moment. It is how we live until that moment that matters. Finding connection with friends, family, and complete strangers. Journey with me. This is the Live Well, Die Well Tour. Well, today I'm very happy to introduce Kathleen Vallee Stein to you, who I'm presently reading her book, Loving Choices, Peaceful Passing, Why My Family Chose Hospice. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm on this chapter in your book that sort of is tugging at my heart, even as I hear your voice talking about and getting ready to talk about, what you and your family went through. But it was you portrayed a scene where your mother was going into your father's hospital room, and she usually went to a chair normally, but this time she went to the bedside of your father, and your father leaned up, and she was talking about a physician coming, that he was going to talk about this word called in service called hospice. And it stuck out to me because it wasn't part of her routine. And I wanted to begin with, were you there, and how was that when you heard your mom for the first time talk about hospice, knowing that your father was in, because people get hospice so late, was in his end of life. Tell me how you felt.
Well, I was impressed. I was really pleased because she had just not taken the lead in anything having to do with his care. She relied on my sister and me to talk with the doctors, to make decisions for him. She had always been subservient to him. She was a mid-century woman, and she just, he was the boss. He made the decisions. She was not the decision maker. So I had asked her the evening before if I could talk to Dr. Archer about hospice, and she said, okay. So that's why I initiated that conversation with him. And he never did bring up hospice. I knew about the hospice benefit because of a job I had as an advocate for seniors on Medicare. So, and he just didn't want to bring it up. So when I finally said, we think it might be time for hospice, he agreed right away. And I said, we need help talking to Dad about this, because I had not spoken to my dad about this. And at that point, he said, doesn't your dad know he's dying? Which really was annoying to me, because he knew, and he wouldn't. And as you know, in the field, doctors are pretty reluctant to bring it up. And so then I went back to Mom that evening after I talked to him, and we discussed it over dinner at the retirement community. And she was okay with that we talk with Dad, and that Dr. Archer was going to come and help us talk to Dad. And she said, we need to tell him in advance. We have to tell him Archer's coming. That was the first time she injected a plan or an idea or something that needed to be done. So that's why I was impressed with her. When we walked in the room, she just marched over to that bed and looked him in the eye and said, Archer's coming at 5:00 to talk about hospice. And I'm so glad she did that. And for me, that was a moment between my parents that was really special to me because of her determination. And she was advocating for him and looking out for him. And it was also very touching. I was there that evening for the conversation. And she again retreated back and let me do it.
What you and I have in common is that we wrote our books 18, 20 years after your father passed away, after Rob passed away in 2000, the same year. Different circumstances, but tell me why. I know why it took me so long, but we're here to talk about you. Why do you feel it took so long to share your story?
Well, it took me a long time to write the book. It took about
Oh,
15
okay.
years. I started writing the book about 3 years after he died, but there were a lot of fits and starts. I'd leave it alone for a while. I'd do a little research for a while. And then I kind of got to a tipping point and I just got dedicated to it. So the last couple of years before it was published, I was working on it all the time and thinking about it all the time.
Well, do you feel like it helped your grief process to start writing about this? That's interesting because I did not start writing the book until, you know, almost 18 years later. How was it writing it throughout the years and taking 15 years to tell your story?
Well, it helped me to craft what happened to me into a story. I wanted it to be interesting to people. I wanted people to wonder what's next. I wanted a good story. And as I was working on it, I realized this is really interesting with two estranged children, the loving letter that my brother wrote, the pastor, a man
Mm,
who only went to church when his kids got married, talking for more than an hour to a pastor, and how important he became to our family. And that was provided by hospice. So
mm,
as I was finally getting my procrastination out of the way, I decided it was worthy of a story. And then the other reason was to let other people know you can do this. Because I talk to people, well, first they think hospice is giving up, and then they think they couldn't possibly take care of a person who's dying, and they can. And
mm.
it's worth the trepidation, it's worth the fear of every time you walk in, what's he going to look like? Is he going to be worse? I overcame those fears and it turned out to be a beautiful relationship. And I want to share that story with people who are thinking, oh, I don't know what it is. I don't know how to do it. Well, here's what it is, and here's how we did it.
I'm so glad you did because hospice has meant something to me that I can't hardly put into words. Um, so the interesting thing is that you and I, we have a similar, not similar background, but we have a background of where it put us in a way that we did know about hospice and the hospice benefit. So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about how your background and how you came to even mention hospice, because you are exactly right. Everyone is scared of the H word and the D word, and what I think we're dying every day. So how do we have a personal relationship, a friendship with our mortality to live more boldly today? So tell us a little bit about your background because you were working in the aging field, and I think that really opened the door to what occurred with your father and your family.
Well, I was manager of the Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program, which is a very long name. It was administered through the California Department of Aging, and I was the manager for Los Angeles County, which was the largest high cap unit. And I trained volunteer counselors to go out into the community, into senior centers, and help people with their Medicare bills, explain to them what HMOs are, what Medicare supplemental insurance is, long-term care insurance, just the whole broad range of services through Medicare. And when I would counsel people about the hospice benefit, I would talk it up. Oh, it's really good. They pay for your pharmaceuticals. A lot of stuff
Right.
is free. And they go, no, we're not. That's giving up. We don't think that they're dying. And after they had just described somebody who was very desperately ill,
Mm.
so I knew what the hospice benefit was, and I knew that people didn't want to access it. And then when my dad said to me when we were alone, I don't want to live like this anymore, I was unable to bring up hospice to my own father. When he was desperately ill, he told me, and I know he picked me, he had 5 kids, he picked me to say that to. And I wasn't able to say, Dad, well, maybe we should talk about hospice. I could not bring myself to say those words. And then he ended up going through 3 weeks of radiation. And that was what brought him to almost, he couldn't eat or drink.
Well, tell me about that experience, and now looking behind you, why do you feel you struggled without, because you were very much aware of the benefit. You you were advocating that for other people. I mean, what was happening? Why was it so hard for you? Have you investigated that?
Yes, a couple of things. He was the authority figure. He was dad. He was the boss of everybody. He'd say to us when we were kids, I'm the king and you're nothing. That was like, we knew our place. You did not question his judgment. Mom didn't either. Nobody ever did. So that was back in the lizard brain telling me, you don't talk like that to this person. Even though he was in a Medicare lift chair in a robe with his hair almost gone and the big block sunglasses on. And I could see with my eyes that he was dying, but I could not process it well enough to speak of it to him. And also, I thought he'd think I wanted him to die.
Mm.
And I think like I could even hear him say to me, do you want me to kick the bucket? I thought he'd think I didn't want him to live anymore and just, okay, let's put you in hospice. So those were two things.
Well, I feel like when one person feels a certain way, a lot of people feel that way. And I think, did it change how you presented this hospice benefit moving forward after you had this experience, or were you still in that specific job?
No, I'm not in the job anymore, but when I go out and talk to groups, I say, I regret that I didn't mention it to them. And if he would have said, look, I don't want to go in hospice, I'm going to fight this, I would have helped him fight it.
Sure. Patient choice. And especially the king, the father, it's, you do realize some of those very simple conversations end up being a magnifier of someone trying to advocate for themselves. And if you're not in this background and you haven't had healthcare, you don't see it. But what's interesting is that you did see it and you still had a hard time. And I think that's very, very relevant to a lot of experiences. So let's talk about your personal experience with hospice. Let's give a little meat around the bones of what your family dynamics were and how this evolved and really became a huge healing process for you and your father and your family.
Well, yeah, I would like to go back to the time when Dr. Archer came in and talked to us with hospice.
Sure.
And that was the evening after I had spoken with him on the phone, and Mom said, okay. And he came into the room. Dr. Archer I just love him. He was such a wonderful doctor. He came in. He said, Mr. Vallee, how are you feeling? Dad said, I feel like hell. I'm sick. I'm just so sick. He really couldn't. They were talking about putting a stomach tube in. So Dr. Archer talked with him for a few moments about how sick he was. And then he said,
Tell me before you go on, is what was your father's diagnosis?
non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was given 4 weeks to live without treatment. He had just completed the 3rd week of radiation and was near death. The radiation was killing him because he couldn't eat or drink.
Gotcha. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Dr. Archer said, Mr. Vallee, and I told Dr. Archer, my dad's a plain talking man. Don't sugarcoat it. Tell him. So he said, Mr. Vallee, we consider guys like you terminal. And I just, at that moment, the world stops revolving. And I felt like the worst daughter in the world. Look what I did. I encouraged this doctor to say this to my father. And then there was quiet for a while. And then my dad said, thank you, Dr. Archer. I've had a good long life and I'm grateful. And it was, the heavens literally opened. The relief, it just flooded into the room. Everybody felt relieved. because he accepted that he was dying and he was ready to go home. He was ready. He didn't want to have any more radiation. And the fact that he said he was grateful is remarkable to me, that he would think to say, I'm grateful at that moment. And he was near blind from a vision problem he had called rotatory nystagmus. So he put his hands up. He was trying to find Dr. Archer's hands to shake his hand. I mean, when I describe that moment, it still chokes me up. And my mother and I were standing together at the end of the bed. And then Dr. Archer walked out the room, and I had already booked the hospice nurse to come for the next day. But the relief, there was just incredible relief.
Yeah. Was there any conversation after Dr. Archer left between you, your mom, and your father?
Not too much. We were all just shell-shocked. We were so emotionally, I mean, we were a Midwestern family. I mean, to witness this much emotion, we couldn't stand it. So my mom and I went back to the retirement home, and she had cherry pie, and I had a piece of chocolate cake, and we calmed down. and he didn't really want to talk. I mean, we all just needed to take some time and figure this out. And the next morning, hospice nurse walks in, Mr. Vallee, I'm here to talk to you about the rest of your life. And we were happy. We weren't pretending. We weren't pretending he was going to get better or encouraging him to get better. We had accepted it, and we were moving forward.
How was that? And talk to me a little bit about when hospice came in. What was that like as a daughter? And I mean, were your other siblings involved? And how did that process go? And tell us a little bit about how long your father was on hospice, because I know that so many come in so late. So yeah, tell me about your hospice experience.
Yeah, that's another message I send is choose hospice sooner rather than later. And he lived 29 days. He died 29 days after he entered the hospice program. Well, what the hospice nurse told me what to do, she said, okay, now you have to go get the hospital bed, get the pharmaceutical straightened out, lots and lots of tasks. That's another thing. The family has to get everything ready for the loved one to come home. And you're caring for a critically ill person. I had to have an oxygen concentrator, a suction machine, because he was choking. So I did all that. My sister they lived in Prescott, Arizona. My sister lived in Scottsdale, and she was a huge help to me. We were a tag team. We worked together. And so she got on the phone and made a lot of phone calls to help things happen. 2 of his children had not spoken to him for a decade, so we didn't really consult with them. She kept them apprised of what was going on, but not too much there. And then my younger brother was having a lot of difficulties. He wasn't able to come, but he had written this just testimonial every parent would love to have. He wrote a letter to my dad because, we're not emotional people, but he was a very good writer, and he wrote this letter. And so that's how all the siblings participated. It was mainly me and my sister that made the hospice happen. And then after I got the house ready, that took a couple of days. And then he came home in the Medicab. They brought him in the wheelchair, put him in the bedroom, hospital bed, and left. And then I was on my own with the hospice. The physician is done at that point, and you're now with the hospice personnel. And they were living in a retirement community, which was a godsend to us because the food was prepared in the kitchen. They pureed because he couldn't eat. And we had staff there in case something happened. The assisted living wing had a pharmaceutical service, so all of their meds were delivered. So a lot of things happened that they were in a retirement home that was helpful. So what happened the first few days that he was in hospice, he got better. He felt great. He was giddy when he got home. He was just looking around.
Why was he feeling better? Talk to me about that.
Well, when they stopped the radiation, the swelling in his throat went down. Within a couple of days, he only had the pureed food for a couple of days. And then he could eat, ice cream. He loved ice cream. And he got to have martinis.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I would have loved your father.
So we hired some personal some custodial care workers, because we knew mom wasn't going to be able to take care of him either physically or any other way. And the caregivers took care of her too. Bless their hearts. They
Well, do
kept her
you think that's
company.
a big misconception that hospice is there 24 hours a day instead of being on call via phone? Because I hear a lot of people saying, "Well, I got hospice, but they weren't here 24 hours a day." And I think that's a biggest myth that yes, you have staff that come in and visit and make sure pain control is under control, but really the family becomes that caregiver for 24 hours a day.
Exactly. A lot of people, and then they say, well, if I'm not having a caregiver there, I can't do it. But that they do have home health aides that come up to three days a week, 3 times a week. And I have a fact sheet that I give out at my talks that gives all that information, what hospice covers. But as I mentioned a couple of times, we were not the kind of family that would take our dad to the toilet,
Right.
so, and they had enough money to hire people. And my sister found a wonderful agency.
Oh, great.
The women were just perfect. And a lot of families say, well, we can't afford that. Or some families say they want to provide that care. I've talked to many people that say, I wanted to give that personal care, the bathing, and even the toileting to their parent. So we did it our way, but
There
that
are
I like
other
to
ways to
there
do
are
it.
other ways to take care of that. Yes,
Sure.
friends, family, things like that people can take care of it.
Well, what was it like? You said your dad was in hospice for 29 days. What were you observing throughout those 29 days? Because you now are aware that your father is on hospice. You're not doing curative treatment. He's giddy, looking around, finally can eat again, and you feel, I don't know, I would feel this like big thing, barrier off my heart that you're actually can enjoy him, but you know that he is dying. So what was that like for you and your sister and your mom?
Oh, both my sister and I, what we felt like was he trusted us. He thought of us as adults. He opened up his financial dealings to me the day after he got home from hospice. He said, go get my computer, I want to look at my books. And he would never mention anything about money to me. And on other levels, just a personal relationship with him. I had a new father. He was
Mm.
a man who carried the burden of a family and a wife for 80 years. And now he just relaxed. He was relaxed. He didn't have to take care of stuff anymore. People were taking care of him. And I always love to say with the home health aides, he called the woman that brought his breakfast muffin lady, and the woman that brought his lunch soup lady, and the home health aide that took him to the bathroom pee lady. He would he was cracking jokes. He was a different man because
Interesting.
he just said, I'm going to go with this. Now, he had had a near death experience when he was 19. And he told me, I don't fear death, because he had kind of gone near death experience kind of thing. So I don't think he was worried about leaving my mother behind. He had told one of the home health aides, and she put it in the log. But he was just delightful. And
Mm.
one of the home health aides wrote a letter after he died, and she described how hard it is to take care of older men. They fight they don't want the help, and they want to boss people around. They don't give up that veneer. And she said, your dad was a gentleman, just a gentleman. They fell in love with him. So he had those few weeks of his life where he was just ready to walk into the next experience. It was
Mm.
amazing.
Do you feel like you got to know a side of your father that you've never seen because of hospice and the caregivers taking on that care, that you could remain the daughter?
Yes. I was a friend.
Mm.
I became and he was a very sexist guy, you know, that age. And I felt he thought of me as a more full human being, not just
Oh,
his
wow.
daughter. Yeah, I don't, it's hard to describe how he changed. And he had a family ring that he wanted to give to his oldest grandson. So that was very emotional for us when he took that ring off, because he'd had it on his whole life. So we went through some very tender, not just, financial things. We returned his car, his rental car, down to Phoenix. And he had his affairs in order when he passed.
Did that surprise you?
Yes, because and what I like to say to people is, if he'd had that fourth week of radiation, he would have died in the ICU. None of that would have happened.
Mm-hmm. Why do you feel that it's so hard for us human beings to let go of those we love, even stopping treatment? Because I'm hearing your story, and sometimes I'm thinking, did your father do the treatment for you, not necessarily for him? Because he, you ponder these things because he was so accepting of it. What do you think?
I think that when he had colon cancer 2 years before this non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he had recovered from it pretty well, but they gave him chemo. And so he never really felt good again. So I think when he got this second cancer with that short prognosis, he was more easily accepting that he was dying than if he had been in the pink of health, and then all of a sudden, it sounds like maybe that's what your experience was.
Mm.
He had been declining. And I think he just did what the doctor said. The doctor said, okay, you need chemo. So he took chemo.
Do you feel that's like a pattern? I mean, here's the doctor suggesting chemotherapy and not even saying, hey, you don't have to do this. There is another way to do this. And I do feel, even with my own parents, it is treatment focused, not necessarily, hey, here are the options, here are the outcomes of those options, and what best fits you. Let's talk about that.
Doctors don't do that, and they don't do it. And I've read Atul Gawande's book,
Sure,
Being
being
Mortal.
mortal.
He's a doctor. Both his parents are doctors, and they didn't get through this process very well. The
Right.
story of his dad. And then there's been, Medicare now pays for end of life discussions. And there was a study done of doctors after that law was passed, and a lot of them don't access that benefit. And the doctors say, we don't know if it's time for hospice or not. They don't know when that person's going to die. And the rabbi who did my foreword, Rabbi Arthur Rosenberg, his quote, I put it on the back of the book, and it's what Dr. Archer said: it's best when the family decides. This is a family decision. I know my mother, it was just killing my mother to see my dad suffering, the choking and the gagging. He was suffering, and it just, why continue the suffering when nobody wants to admit it's not going to cure the cancer? And you have to say, use your common sense, look before your eyes.
And it's so hard when your heart is the heart takes over and you become emotional. And then, and I think this is really what my message is too, is please plan and do events, care planning, and your directives prior to a medical event. Because once that medical event happens, a serious illness happens, suddenly you're thinking with your heart and emotions versus really what is the best thing I want for myself, as well as what does my father want? Because it's really not me projecting what I want for my father. It's my father telling me what he wants. And I think that's very important to recognize that. Now, you did write a book. I mentioned it earlier, and I've been reading it. Thank you for sending me the copy and signing it. I only keep signed copies, so I was so happy you signed it for me. It's going to go on my shelf. Loving Choices, Peaceful Passing, Why My Family Chose Hospice. Why that title?
Oh, I went through in 15 years. I went through so many titles. One of my titles was Martinis and Ice Cream.
Oh, I like that one.
And then I did too. But then my friend said, Kathleen, you're writing a serious book. You can't give a joke title. So I had tons of titles. But what it is it's a loving choice. It's a choice that is a loving choice to make, because you don't want we loved our father and we didn't want to watch him suffer anymore. And as a result, he passed peacefully. So one leads to the other. And then I put that tagline on Why My Family Chose Hospice, because this is written from a personal family member point of view. So, her family did it. Maybe my family can do it.
Oh, I love that. I really love that. Now, throughout this whole process, did this change your opinion about end of life and hospice itself?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Tell me a
very
little bit
much.
about that.
Well, 30% of Medicare budget goes to the last month of life. And I know a lot of these little old people are in there getting all kinds of last ditch efforts to save them. And it's financially costly, and it's human suffering. It's costly. But I even hesitate to mention that, because people will think, oh, she just wants to save Medicare a few bucks. I mean, but I think doctors need to be educated, and your podcast, my book, just talking. I always thought I'd sell my book word to word, from one family to another. And if there wasn't such tight security in hospitals these days, I'd go drop some off.
Good for
in the
you.
waiting room with that. I did get some into nursing homes, where I offered to give them to people in nursing homes, just to have it.
Well, and people have such a hard time with coming to terms with our own mortality. It's still in the closet, and I want to normalize this conversation. And I think, but by having a personal experience like you and your family had, it must impact how you are going to look at your own end of life. So after your father passed, and how did this affect your conversations with your family? Do you have advanced care planning, and have you started talking about your own mortality with your immediate family?
Yeah, we have we filled out both the Advanced Care Directive and 5 Wishes.
Nice.
Both of them. And then now people are starting to tape record their advanced wishes. And I have a friend who's 84, and she and her husband have told each other, have a friend they designated to make the decision, because they know their daughters probably won't. So I think people are getting a little more creative in thinking about this. But my daughter brags about it. She says, my parents have their will, their trust, their advanced directives. Mom wrote a book. I'm good.
But you know what? It takes so much burden off children not guessing what you might want. And then if you don't have that written down and have conversations about it, I believe those who are making some of those decisions always wonder if they made the right decision. And I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to healthcare power of attorney or proxy or agent or whatever you call that, because you don't have any decisions to be made. You're upholding and you're acting as that person. And it's really important to understand that. Now, what do you hope when people read your book? What do you hope they walk away with?
I hope they walk away with hope that choosing hospice can give them wonderful experiences with their loved one. They don't have to watch their loved one suffer to death, because that's what they do now. They suffer to death. They usually die in the hospital. 80% of Americans die in a hospital or nursing home, usually alone, with continuing to try to cure them. I think maybe maybe we should stop curative care and start comfort care, instead of saying aggressive treatment to hospice. maybe it's time to consider comfort care. And palliative care is coming into its own as well. And you don't have to be terminally ill to get palliative care. So more education on that, I think, will help.
Well, and I think your personal story is going to open many doors for many other families. And I do think that's one of your goals is, and even listening to the story this morning, it really, I believe, and please correct me if I'm assuming certain things, but I believe hospice gave you the bridge to get to know a different side of your father. And I think that's absolutely beautiful.
It
And
did.
and hospice was that factor. And I think that I don't want individuals to see hospice as giving up or anything like that, because your father would have died no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he was still taking treatment in the hospital or he was home comfortable and was able to communicate with you guys. I love your book. I love your family. I love that you had the opportunity to see a different side. Where can people find your book?
Anywhere books are sold online.
And that's even Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, anywhere.
Anywhere. And here in Los Angeles, it's at Vroman's Bookstore in Pasadena.
Oh, I love Pasadena.
Yeah.
So, but you also, I know we're coping with this I'm hoping on the edge of the end of this pandemic. And once things lift, you are welcome. You're interested in telling your story and having speaking engagements.
Oh, yes.
When we get back to what is now our new normal, I should say. So you're open to that. So how do people find you?
My website is valleyview.com, VALLEE, view, VIEW.com. I've got videos on there talking about certain topics having to do with hospice, so they can hear me talking about it.
Well, there's not many people that become a huge cheerleader for hospice unless you're working in that field. And here you are with a personal story. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you advocating for end-of-life choices, advocating for hospice specifically, and thank you so much for that. We need more people like you out there. And I am so grateful to have met your father and your family through your words. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing our story. And just know this, Kathleen, you are changing how people live and die just by telling your story, and that to me is makes you a very special person to me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember, you're the designer. This podcast is produced by Jason Andre with 7 Season Films. If you're interested in telling your story via podcast, look him up. You can find him at 7seasonfilms.com.